we got up to Rabbi Gamliel Omer. Rabbi Gamliel said that you have to explain three things. If you don't explain them, then his words are, you have not fulfilled your obligation. I pointed out, all the commentaries say you haven't fulfilled it in the best possible way. No one says that you have actually failed. And the question is, which obligation did he not fulfill? There are certain mitzvahs that apply in the night. Three of them are mitzvahs of eating the Paschal sacrifice, and eating matzah, and eating maror. And one of them is telling the story. So let's say you take out the book of Exodus and you read the first 15 chapters, and then you have supper and you eat the three of them, and you don't say what Rabbi Gamliel said. What did you lose? Which mitzvah didn't you fulfill, even in the best possible way? And the commentators are split. Some say the mitzvah that you didn't fulfill in the best possible way is Maggid, so to speak, telling the story. And the others say that the eating hasn't been done in the best possible way, which is very strange. Why would the fact that you didn't explain the symbolism of the foods mean that your mitzvah of eating wasn't fulfilled in the best possible way? So as we explained several times in this series, the mitzvah of the night is not a mitzvah of reciting, not a mitzvah of telling a story. It's a mitzvah of reliving the Exodus. I gave you several proofs of that idea and several applications. Now, with that background, these comments all make terrific sense. The people who ate who performed the Seder in Egypt, they knew what they were eating. The bitter herbs were because they suffered slavery. And Pesach was, they're sitting there and the Egyptians are dropping dead. And the matzah they had eaten as slaves, and as we'll see, it refers to the future as well. So they knew what they were doing. If we don't know what we're doing, we're not doing what they did. We're not reliving what happened to them. With that, you can understand where Rabbi Gamliel is coming from. Not, as I always say, that that's the only explanation, but it's an explanation that makes sense, I think. So last time we talked about the Pesach, how the symbolism of Pesach works. So we're now up to matzah. And here I've paid very careful attention to what is said, because it's a little bit problematic. I worried about it for years and years until one of my sons-in-law explained it to me. This matzah that we are eating, for what purpose? In this context, it means, what does it symbolize? It says, because when the Jews were in Egypt, at that night when they made the Seder, they made dough. And the dough that they prepared didn't have time to leaven, because the King of Kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, revealed himself to them and redeemed them. In other words, they made a dough. Yes, why did they make a dough? I'll explain it to you. They made a dough. And the Hagaddah says, but that dough didn't have time to rise, because the HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared to them so quickly that it didn't have time to rise. And it quotes a verse which says this, like word for word. This verse is describing the Jews the night after the Exodus took place. Not the night of the 15th, where we count, the Torah's description is a little different, where we count the night of the 15th, but the night of the 16th. After they spent 12 hours traveling during the day, and came to the first place of rest. And it says, at that first place of rest, they baked the dough, which they brought out of Egypt. And what they did with that dough, what they baked was ugos matzos, that is to say, bread of matzah, not chametz, not leavened. Why? Why did they bake matzahs 24 hours after they left? I'll tell you why. Because ki gorshu Mitzrayim. Because they were thrust out of Egypt, forced out of Egypt. The Egyptians came and they said, get out. You want time for extra preparations? Get out. We're all dead men. They couldn't tarry. They couldn't take extra time. And they didn't prepare any provisions for their trip. So what's the picture here? The picture is, because Baruch Hu says, tonight, tomorrow morning, you're going to leave. Make the Seder tonight, leave tomorrow morning. And I say, wonderful. Pack up? Well, at 4 in the morning, we'll have time, and we'll pack up and we'll go. And what are we going to eat when we go? I'll tell you what we're going to eat. We're going to eat challahs. Challahs. We'll bake them now, here in Egypt. We'll wrap them in saran wrap. We'll take them with us. And when we get to the first point where we stop over tomorrow night, that's where we'll leave. Because, as the Ran explains, the laws of Pesach that year in Egypt weren't the laws that we have today. Some of this is in the Mishnah, in Pesach. The law was, during the first 24 hours, the night and day in which they left, you're not allowed to eat chametz. After that, you could eat chametz. And there was no prohibition against owning chametz. So they said, tomorrow night we will eat the challahs that we will make now. So they prepared a dough. Of course, to make challah, the dough has to rise. Oh, but because Baruch Hu cut that plan short, he appeared among them, and redemption took place so quickly that they didn't have an opportunity to make the challahs. They just took dough. You'll ask me, but that means it's like 18 hours until they got to the next destination. From here, the Talmud learns that a dough that's kept in constant motion doesn't rise. They were walking, they were carrying it wasn't sitting, and therefore it didn't rise. And the Torah testifies that 18 hours later, when they got to the first destination, it had not risen. And they baked it there because it's time for supper. You're not going to wait for 2 hours for challahs to be done. They baked it into matzahs, which means that they ate matzahs on the night of the 16th, when they didn't have to. They weren't required not to. It's just the divine providence worked it out that they should eat matzah there also. Now, there's a gigantic amount here that needs to be understood. Now, let me explain the plain part of it, and then maybe I'll talk to you about a little of it. But when you read it and you try to make sense out of it, there's a whole complex picture here with lots and lots of details, and a lot needs to be explained. Why are we eating the matzah on the night of the Seder? This is what bothered me for years and years. If you're telling me that the source of this action is in a verse that describes historically what happened 24 hours later, how does it explain what I'm doing now? What's the connection? So my son-in-law explained to me what this eating of the matzah reminds us is that the matzah was there because it symbolizes haste. The matzah is something which can be done very quickly. They ate matzah the night of the Seder. You can make matzah in 10 minutes. Oh, don't talk to me about the 18-minute rule in the bakeries. The 18-minute rule has several different loads of matzah created. It's to switch the oven, not because it takes 18 minutes to make matzah. It takes 8 minutes to make matzah. I saw over here in Bukharim, there was a fellow, maybe he's still there, who made pitot, big, fine pitot. And we saw him, he put the water in the flour, and he rolled it out into a dough, and then he slapped it on the wall of the oven. Within 10 minutes, it was all finished. From water to flour to the finished product was 10 minutes. That's the bread of slavery. That when you're a slave, you come home dead tired at the end of the day, and you want food, you don't wait 2 hours for fresh bread to come out of the oven. You do it in the fast while. That's why it was a bread of slavery. Here we're being told that they, thinking that they're going to be free, and that therefore they don't have to eat that bread of slavery. No. Because Baruch Hu prevented it. So we eat the matzah to remember the idea of the haste with which we left Egypt. Well, what's the message that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was sending? The message HaKadosh Baruch Hu was one of the infinity of messages that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sending is that what you call the bread of slavery, which is true, is also the bread of freedom. Also the bread of freedom. Don't think that you've cut your connection to matzah because it's a expression of slavery and you're not slaves anymore. No, the matzah also is an expression of freedom, and this is what I told you when you have these three items: Pesach, matzah, moror. That the Pesach clearly describes the redemption, the salvation that Kodesh Baruch Hu gave us. And the moror describes the slavery, and the matzah describes both. And that's why I think it's crucial. We don't have the Pesach at all anymore. Moror is only rabbinic because the moror's obligation is tied to the Pesach. When you don't have the Pesach, you don't have the moror either. There's a biblical law. But the matzah is deraisa, and the matzah carries both symbolisms. And the matzah carries you from one to the other. What started at the beginning of the Seder as Holach Mahanya has become the lechem of freedom. Just as we who go through the recitation, and we'll see in 2 paragraphs that what I'm saying is exact. We go through the recitation, we ourselves are passing from slavery to freedom. So we read about the matzah, passing from slavery to freedom. Now, the matzah is called in Aramaic, Nahamad Menusa. It's the bread of emunah, which means, some will call it faith. I would rather translate it as rational trust. It means trusting in God and being connected to God and living in terms of God. This matzah carries that whole idea. I'll have to see how and why that is true, but that's part of what's being said here. Yeah.
Is that why most of the minchas and Beis Hamikdash are forms of matzah?
Yes, and in fact, everything of flour that goes on the mizbeach is matzah. There's no leavened things that go on the mizbeach. I think that's right, and I'll explain that a little bit in a second. Yeah.
So if matzah symbolizes something like enlightened conviction or like rational conviction, how is it that same thing can be a symbol of the slavery in Egypt itself? How can it be then turned to bad for that time when we were not serving a Kodesh Baruch Hu?
The question is whether the fact that we had it there was bad. Let me tell you what the Gemara says about this, which will help give some understanding of the symbolism here. I don't know how many are aware, the Gaon of Vilna, the great halachist, was also a great Kabbalist. Some would say that at his time he was the greatest Kabbalist of all. And he wrote major works in Kabbalah. Perish on Safta and Siyusa, which you have 3 lines of text and you have 2 pages of Gra. Gigantic. He said that the letters in Hebrew express ideas, express laws, even the shapes of the letters. One easy example that he gave is that the word sukkah, spelled without a vav, which is only there for the vowel, the letters of the word sukkah depict the shapes of the possible structures called a sukkah. The samach is completely closed. That would be a sukkah with 4 sides. The chaf has 3 sides, which is also a kosher sukkah. And the hay is 2 sides and a spitz, which is also a kosher sukkah. So the letters depict the actual shape of the structure called a sukkah. Now, in matzah, he points out that if you take the 2 words matzah and chametz, can I do this on the board here? Yeah. So if you take the 2 words matzah and chametz, oh, I forgot about this. One second, I'll pick this up and put it in my pocket. This is, oh boy, matzah. Let's try it with the black. Be able to see better. Matzah. That's better? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Let's try. Yeah. So this is matzah in Hebrew. And this is chametz. I'll write it the same way in Hebrew. So matzah and chametz share two letters, the mem and the tzadi. The difference between them is that matzah ends with a hey, and chametz begins with a ches. Now, what's the difference between the ches and the hey? Right? Let's suppose I start with a hey, right? Now, let's suppose I just take this line and extend it upwards. Let's call it rising. If this line extends upwards, you get a ches. That's the difference between matzah and chametz. Matzah is something in which the rising didn't take place. It remained down. And chametz, it rises up. That's a depiction of the difference between matzah and chametz. And this depiction expresses a halacha. The halacha is that chametz and matzah are composed of exactly the same ingredients. There are 5 grains. Only things made out of those 5 grains can be matzah, and only things made out of those 5 grains can be chametz. Which means you could define chametz as matzah as frustrated chametz, or you could define chametz as, extended matzah. So then, what you have to see is that on Pesach, chametz is the enemy, and matzah is salvation. You have to explain what is about rising that creates the destruction. And one explanation is this. I want you to imagine someone who's never seen bread. He goes into a store and he sees all these packages with loaves of bread inside. When he picks up the package, what is he going to experience? What surprise will he have?
Very light.
It's very light. For that volume, it's very light. Why is it so light?
Air.
Because it's mostly air. Bread is mostly air. You know very well. You take the bread, you squeeze it, you can squeeze it down to a much smaller volume. Right? Bread has false volume, has a false image of greatness, but it's largely full of air. With matzah, what you see is what you get. There's no false impression that matzah creates. Matzah is a time where you're enabled to see things, you're influenced, you're inspired to see things as they are, to strip away from them the veneer of much greater substance, much greater reality, much greater importance. And the application to Pesach one application, I should say, is the false appearance of mechanical cause and effect running the world. Why do things happen? You trace it back to the cause. This happened and that happened because that happened, this happened, and so forth and so on. From our point of view, divine providence is behind everything, which means none of it is mechanical, none of it is automatic, and none of it forces. When you know that there's a possibility of miracles, then when you have cause and effect, you don't say, well, this effect happened because that cause happened, that cause made the effect happen because God could have intervened with a miracle. It's only because he didn't intervene that it happened. We say more, the energy of the sequence is provided by God. So to back off from the appearance of nature running the way the world runs. And I think we could understand this in a very dramatic form for the Jews in Egypt. I've told you several times, the Midrash says that 80% didn't make it out. They died in the days of darkness. What happened? What happened? Why didn't they make it out? What did they miss? What did they fail? So I want you to picture, remember we told you that many of the Jews who were there, maybe the majority, were worshiping idols. That decades before they had stopped performing circumcision, that instead of staying in Goshen where their residence had been set up, they had spread out among the Egyptians. They were living side by side with the Egyptians. How did they look at the world? How did they understand where their position was? Well, Egypt is an empire. There's a mighty army, chariots. It has a civilization. It has ancient chronicles. It has buildings from 1,000 years before. It has magicians who can do things that look very powerful. Egypt is the reality. Oh, yes, I remember when I was a child, I was told stories about our ancestors. Someone called, I think his name was Abraham. And there were a couple of other ones, I don't remember them too well. Yeah, and we had stories, bedtime stories, about what these people did and what they thought about it. And that's nice, and it's cute. And I would put my children to bed with the same stories. But I'm an adult now. And as an adult, I live in the real world. And the real world is Egyptian power, Egyptian culture, Egyptian politics. That's the real world. Along comes Moses and says, guess what? You're dreaming. You're dreaming. What you call the real world is just the skin on the onion. The substance beneath it is entirely different. Really? Well, people had to struggle with that. The Malbim says, as I told you, that the plagues were an educational process for the Jews. He says, had the purpose been to free the Jews from the Egyptians, the Kodesh Baruch Hu could have started with the death of the firstborn. They've gone out right away. No, it was in addition to being an educational program for the Egyptians, which the Pesukim say of it literally, but it was also an educational program for the Jews who had lost sight of this. And not everybody made it. Not everybody got the message, to the extent that they were able to be qualified to leave with the rest of the people. Matzah says, look again at the world. Don't see it in terms of its own veneer. Don't see it in terms of its own grandiosity, its megalomania, its narcissism. Try to see it what it really is. Now, go back to what you said. That means that our eating matzah in Egypt wasn't an accident. It wasn't just a matter of how do you eat when you're slaves and so on and so on. But eating matzah was part of the reality that was appropriate for them in that position. There too, the challenge was to try to see through. But it was a very difficult challenge because it wasn't after the Exodus, it wasn't after the plagues. But the stimulus was there, the message was there. And retroactively, they could say, aha, that was what we were really living. That was the actual truth of the situation. We didn't understand it. As we say in Shir Malos before we Hayinu Kacholmim, when the final salvation comes, it says, we are in a position of dreamers, and the question is where that position is located. And when you read it, naturally you think, oh well, when the redemption comes, and the great miracles come, and the great revelation of God, we'll feel as if we're in a dream because it's so wonderful, it's so spectacular. But some of the commentators say, no. When that revelation takes place, you look back on your prior lives, your prior history, and say, there we were dreamers. Now we're awake to the reality. There we were dreamers. So similarly, when they left Egypt, they think back to the matzah that they ate, and there were people who maintained. The tribe of Levi maintained bris milah. They didn't serve idols. They maintained the continuity from the patriarchs. So there's some people who did live in terms of matzah then. And that's the idea of Nam the Menusa. Anyway, so that's just a little bit of an introduction here. On the surface, the reason we're eating the matzah is to remember the chipazon, the speed with which HaKadosh Baruch Hu took us out, which had the effect of us eating matzah the following night. There's a lot going on here. Where you are at your Seder, ask this question. See what kind of answers you get. There's an enormous amount of material here. Then the third is mora. That's not a hard one. We eat this bitter herb because the Egyptians embittered our lives. The lives of our ancestors in Egypt. As it says, they, the Egyptians, embittered their lives, the lives of the Jews, with hard work, with mortar and bricks, and all work of the field, the work which they did, they forced them to work b'farach. And we explained the word farach with harshness. We explained the Tosfos from Rabbi about that, with the atbash and the gematria. Now, what I told you about reliving is the subject of the next paragraph. Let's read the paragraph carefully. We're going till 4? Right. Okay, we only go to quarter of 4. In every generation, as we read it, you should notice that it looks like we're saying the same thing twice. And try to see in your mind whether you can figure out why it's not the same thing. In every generation, a person is obligated to see himself as if he left Egypt. As the verse says, you should declare to your child, and by the way, this is the verse that expresses the commandment to do what we are doing at the Seder. The commandment to present the story, to use a neutral term, at the Seder comes from this verse. You should declare to your children on that day, saying, for the sake of this, Hashem did for me when I left Egypt. Now those words, we saw them before. We were talking about to the Russia and to the Elishol, but we didn't pay attention to this fact. Who's talking now? I'm talking. I'm sitting at my Seder and I'm talking. The Torah says, these are the words you should say to your children. This is talking for all generations. Okay, so I'm taking the instruction. What word should I say to my children? For the sake of this, Hashem did for me. Now when my child, who's 9 years old, hears me talking, what does he hear? He hears, Abba said he left Egypt. That's what the words say. This isn't our ancestors now. It's me. So the Hagaddah comments. Now, and look how careful it is. Not only with our ancestors, not only our ancestors did Kadosh Baruch Hu redeem, but even we with them. Meaning, our ancestors, yes, we're not denying the historical thing, but we also were there. And now it quotes a different verse. We, he took out of there in order to bring us, to give us this land, yes, the land that he swore to our ancestors. So why is it said twice? You have 2 verses. Yes, in both verses you could make the same argument. One is, well, let's see if you figure out. Well, there are 2 verses. What are the differences between the 2 verses? It's even in English, which I just read to you.
I versus us?
Yeah, how about singular versus plural? The first is singular, the second is plural. Says the Maharal, the first is talking to the individual, to think of himself, that he went through this process himself, and the second is the nation. The nation as a whole, all of us went through this process. And this is a direct expression of the fact that a Jew, I would say, every human being, or almost every human being has this, but you have a dual identity. You have an individual identity, and you have a citizenship identity. And they're not hermetically sealed from one another. Part of your personal identity is your citizenship identity. In other words, people play various roles in life. You could be a child of your parents. You could be a husband to your wife. You could be a father to your children. You could be an employee or an employer in the terms of your work. You could be a neighbor, and you could be a citizen. There are various roles that you play in life. And unlike the common current Western prejudice that really you are an individual, Aristotle would tell you that your participation in certain roles are just as fundamental to your identity as the things which divide you from everyone. It's a common cultural, philosophical fallacy to think that my identity is only that which is unique to me, and all the other things are just things that I do, but they're not part of who I am. So the 2 verses require us to look at ourselves in two contexts. First of all, what sets me aside from everything else, and second of all, the role that I play vis-a-vis the nation as a whole. Our sources talk about the nation as a kind of collective identity, where each person is a part of that collective identity. The Ritva and Rosh Hashanah, for those who know. And here we are saying explicitly that this is our obligation, to see ourselves as reliving that event by what we are doing at the reciting the Hagaddah. That's what I told you that. Yeah.
It's not clear to me how Hashem brought me, who's in this generation, out of Egypt. What's the connection between me in this generation and our ancestors who were brought out of Egypt? Like, I understand maybe because I'm Jewish and because
okay. It's a good question. How do we explain in terms of, in semi-practical terms, how this works? And there are two ways to do it. One way is this. We have a policy in our commemorative days, the holidays in particular, to celebrate the past event by doing things that are similar to what happened at that time. So the Seder is a spectacular example, but living in Sukkos for 7 days, just as our ancestors when they came out of Egypt lived in Sukkos. Hanukkah we light lights, like the lights were in the temple, and Purim we have a festive celebration. Just they had a festive celebration. We do what they did. Why is that? Why is our doing what they did the relevant thing to do? So you could say that makes it vivid. There are people in America who on July 4th reenact battles. You know, they put on 17th century military uniforms, they go off into the forest, they have pop guns, they shoot at each other. Okay, you could say that, but from our point of view, it's much deeper than that. The fact that the Exodus took place on this date is a symptom of the fact that this date is a liberation day. In the calendar date, there is the power of liberation. So, just as they were enabled to undergo liberation on that date, we too can experience liberations on that date. That potential is given to us also. So we are reacting to the same metaphysical reality that they reacted to. And there really are two views here, but one view is just to say, since the event took place on that date, thereafter, that date is imbued with the potential which it had for that event. But others go even further and say, is it an accident that the Exodus took place on this date? And had it been on another date, that date would have been imbued with the liberation force? No. From the creation of the world, that date was chosen to be a liberation day. And you have actually a hint to this in the Torah itself. And you can check if you ask people to see how well they know Chumash, which is in some places not very popular. What did Lot give the angels who came to him to eat? He took them in at risk of his life. They didn't want to come in, and he pressured them to come in. He made a feast for them, and he gave them matzos. Did he really? Crackers. Nice guy. Pulling out all the stops, right? You know, I mean, he didn't have any challahs left over from yesterday. He didn't have any made during the day. Come on, it was a rich man. He was a respected man. He was one of the leaders of the city, right? A judge in the city, right? Why did he give the matzos? Say Chazal, because it was Pesach. Lot, hundreds of years before the Exodus, gave his guests matzahs. Why? Because this the 15th of Nisan is Liberation Day. And Liberation Day carries with it certain potential powers. And those powers are realized by acting in certain ways. And he was living up to that. So that means it goes all the way back. So just as they realized the liberation potential of the day, so we too, in every generation, can realize the liberation potential of the day. That's one part. And the other part is what we said before a few days ago about how could people in the concentration camps and in the death camps make a Seder. The question is asked. It's interesting. I don't know from the Hagaddah, from the Holocaust literature that it was asked then. They just risked their lives to make matzah and to recite the Hagaddah at night after everything was quiet. But people later, who are so much smarter, ask, why are we celebrating freedom when you weren't free? You could talk about being slaves. And the answer is that the exodus from Egypt created a spiritual freedom which was never revoked. It was never revoked. A Jew could always be a Jew. Whereas in Egypt, the whole cultural framework broke down. Only a tiny minority stayed faithful. And some commentators say that the Egyptians undertook active strategies to break down the cultural framework. Like, for example, the Tsars in Russia, who for hundreds of years looked for strategies to assimilate the Jews. They too looked for strategies and they were partly successful. They weren't totally in vain. That can't be done. No power, external power, can push a person to give up his Judaism. He can choose to do it, yes, that he can do. But that's how. What story did I just hear? Someone just told me a story. The punchline was, but I'm a Jew and that you can't take away from me. I can't remember the details of the story, but that's the idea. Sorry?
Daniel Pearl, the journalist?
Maybe. He was the one on the airplane.
No, he was executed by
Oh, okay. So it was something like that. He was put under pressure and he said, this you can't take from me. So I think those are two ways in which we can say we're participating in what they did as well. Okay, so that's that paragraph. Now, this I'll read this to you and then I'll remind you what Rabbi Mazel said here. Therefore, we are obligated now, I just want to take a moment to explain this word, lehodos. First word is lehodos. What do they translate here? To give thanks. What do they translate in your book?
To give thanks.
All to give thanks?
Yeah.
Okay. Lehodos in Hebrew has two meanings. One is to give thanks, and the other is to acknowledge, to affirm, to assert, to declare. And in fact, if you look in the Rambam in Hilchos Brachos, I saw this in English. He says there are three kinds of brachos. Brachos that you make on a mitzvah, and brachos that you make on food and drink, and brachos hodah. Brachos of hodah. And the brachos of hodah divided into three subcategories. Praise, petition, and hodoyah. The translation that I saw wrote like this. The three major categories are mitzvos and pleasures and thanksgiving. And the thanksgiving divides up into praise and petition and thanksgiving. No, that's not right. First of all, it's redundant. You can't have major category and the subcategory of the same name. And in Hebrew, they're not the same. One is hoda'ah, the other is hodayah. Hodayah is gratitude. Hodah can be either one. It can be either gratitude or declaration. The Rambam is saying that the third category is the category of declaration. All three of praise and petition and gratitude are based on a foundation of declaration. All three are a declaration plus an attitude towards what you're declaring. So let's take it. Praise. Praise describes something as great, but it doesn't just say the item that's great, it expresses your attitude towards being great. You know, there's a mountain that's 5 miles high. Okay? There is. Right? How do I feel about it? You have no clue. I just told you a fact about how high it is. If I say, imagine the majesty of a mountain that's 5 miles high, I've told you a lot more. I told you how I feel about it. I'm overwhelmed by it. I'm inspired by it. I'm thrilled by it. So you have the 5 miles high plus my attitude towards it. What is petition? Petition starts with 2 facts, 2 familiar facts. I need and you have. Those are just facts, right? Maybe because of that I'll congratulate you. You know, who knows what I'll do? Now I come to you and I say, please give me, right? The please give me is a response to those 2 facts that I need and you have. The same is true with gratitude. Gratitude starts with I have received a benefit. I have something good now that I didn't have before. Then I trace it outwards and I say, where did it come from? I see it came from you, and I say, thank you for providing me with this. So again, it starts with a declaration of fact, and then expresses my attitude towards the fact. And I believe, yes, I am influenced by philosophy of language. I agree. And speech act theory and all the rest of it. But I think that's a clear way to explain what the Rambam is saying. So, having said all of that, the first word here is we are obligated lehodos. Now, let's see if we can figure out, given the 2 possible meanings of this, and given the rest of the context, what it is probably expressing. It's to praise, 2 words for praise, to glorify, to exalt, to express his preciousness, to bless, and more words for praise. So, none of these words refer to gratitude. None of these words refer to gratitude. They all refer to different types of praise. So I think translating the first word as thanksgiving is right in this case. Because otherwise it would just be another one of the words for praising. So we're going to give thanks to and give all manner of praise to the one who did for our ancestors and for us all these miracles. And here's a list. Took us out from slavery to freedom, from groaning to joy, from mourning to Yom Tov, holiday celebration, from darkness to light, to great light, from subjugation to redemption. That's what we are going to give thanks and praise God for. And we will say before him a new song. Now, I've told some of you on many occasions, when they translate in English song, it really means poetry. Shir and shira mean poetry. That's why in Hebrew, mizmor shir is not redundant. Mizmor means music. Shir means poetry. Mizmor shir or shir mizmor means poetry together with music. And in the temple there was music. But you have to understand, and in older English, song also meant poetry. It may have meant music as well, but also can mean poetry. Now, I just want to point out one little contrast here. Here it says we're going to say before him, Shira Chadasha. Now turn a couple of pages at the end of 2 paragraphs. We have a long blessing. Three paragraphs. Baruch Atah Hashem. And it says, V'nodelecha shir chadash, on our redemption. Right? Just before you get to Brei Pia Gofen. So where we are, it's shira chadasha in the feminine, and there it's in the masculine. Now, some of the commentators point out something here which feminine and masculine for us are categories of the universe. And they work together. And it is a staple of Kabbalistic thinking that you can never have anything that operates without having both. And even things which are dominantly one have some aspect of the other, otherwise it couldn't exist. And if you think Lahavdil, Elef Havdalas, of the yin and yang diagram, yeah, I think there's something there. Because the yin has a little dot of yang, and the yang has a little dot of yin, right? Nothing's pure. Only one thing is pure. What's that? Kodesh Baruch Hu. Only Kodesh Baruch Hu is really one, singular, pure and with only one dimension. Everything else is multiple dimensions. So now, think, and this is expressed in the two sexes. That's also part of the expression of this idea. But the idea is one which has much deeper philosophical and spiritual roots. Let's think about redemptions. Redemptions are of different kinds. And let me give you the paradigm. Let's take a woman who's in childbirth. Now today there are anesthesias, although many tell me, and my first wife, my second wife, anesthesia is not good for her. Even the present day anesthesias are dangerous and they can have deleterious effects, much better without. And women are in terrible pain. Terrible pain. And then the birth takes place. And then they're holding a baby. How do they feel? The pain is over. The child is here. It's like having been in a temporary, very difficult, painful place and being saved from it. Yeah, that's a salvation, right? But, like the Talmud testifies, one thing she has in mind is the next pregnancy and the next birthing process and the next child. So this is a temporary salvation. Salvation that gives a tremendous benefit, but then has after it at least the possibility of another difficult period needing another salvation. We've had that. We had a salvation from Egypt. We're talking about it, right? But 1,200 years later, we ended up with Babylonian conquest and exile. And after 70 years, a certain portion of the population came back, rebuilt the second temple, and that temple was destroyed. It went into exile again. So there are salvations which are temporary salvations. That's Shira Chadasha in the feminine. But at the end, we'll have to go through the intervening material. I'll talk to you about it. But in the second place, which I showed you, there the context is talking about the future. It's talking about the redemption that will take place when the third temple is built. That's the last redemption. Because after that, there's no down. That's why it's masculine. It's a one-time, finished event. Such a profound idea built into just the variation between feminine and masculine. But if you have your eyes open and you're used to reading Jewish texts, within a few paragraphs, you have the same phrase, one feminine, one masculine. You have to ask, why is that? And this is rabbinic language. So as rabbinic language, they chose it to express an idea which we could be able to understand. In the Torah, you have to say the same thing, but there you always have the possibility that because Baruch Hu put it in a way that we can't understand it. But here, the human beings made it. And they wrote it for us to say. So it means they wrote it to communicate to us. So here, we're much safer ground to try to explain what it means. Yeah, you want to say something?
So where we have these multiple different ways of praising Hashem, two possibilities. One, is this different ways of interacting with his different aspects, potentially? Or two, could it be different ways that we have to engage, or different mechanisms that we have to engage with Hashem, or a combination of the two?
Very good, and very good question. Let's just count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Always get away with Malchus's combination of everything else.
7, 8, 9. What does he say at the end? No malafana shir chadasha. Is another expression of praise. 10 would not be an accident.
10 would not be what?
Would not be an accident. And the numbers are created that way. Some places there are 7, some places there are 13. And here, I think, we will express before him a new song is a 10th, and separating 9 from the 1 is also appropriate. This would mean, as you said at the end, both. Both. There are different aspects of the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu operates in the world, and if we knew them well, if we understood them well, then we would understand that we would be able to react to each one. I want to tell you the sefer called Shari Ora, which is an early Rishon on Kabbalah. He goes through all the spheros and how they combine, so on and so on. And he writes the introduction. Who am I writing to? My brothers, Jews, because you pray. And when you pray, the words are meant to relate to various different spheros. And you don't know what you're saying. And because you don't know what you're saying, your prayer is not as powerful as it could be, as it should be. So I'm going to help you. Many Sfarim are written this way, for people to help them in certain ways. I'm going to help you so that you'll be able to pray better and your prayers will have a better effect. So that means, just as you said, the various words in prayer are meant to relate to various different spheros, right? And through them, of course, to the Creator who's behind the spheros. They're just his modes of action. And then, of course, the way we would relate would depend upon the kind of sphere that we were interacting with. That's 100% right. Okay, today's Thursday. Yeah.
I think you're associating Hashem's oneness with purity. Is that correct? That there's a correlation?
Purity in the sense of nothing added. Like pure olive oil, just olive oil. Nothing but olive oil. Not two things, just one content. Purity in that sense of not complex, not having more than one ingredient. When the Rambam and the Kabbalists say when we call God one, sort of, there's a lot of rigmarole that I would have to go through to get it all on the table. When we call him one thing you mean is no number other than one can possibly apply to him. Now I said one thing you mean. I didn't say that's all you mean. I'm hinting to you there's more to mean, but okay. So that means if there were different ingredients, then there'd be more than one number. There'd be the number of the ingredients. So there can't be any ingredients. There can't be any complexity. This is one of the infinity of mistakes that poor Richard Dawkins makes when he tries to argue against religion with his master argument. He says complexity has to be produced by complexity. And all the commentators say, you're talking about the physical world. Religious people don't believe that's a physical thing that made the world. They believe in a transcendent creator. And one of the beliefs is that he's simple, not complex. You don't like the theology? Argue against the theology. Your biology won't help you with that. Evolution won't help you with that. But you're too lazy and ignorant to do the theology. So you pretend that your science is winning the case. You're fighting with a fiction. One of his many mistakes.